Our opening panel discussion is called Fit for the Future. And again, as Jared said, we're not going to be jogging, at least I hope not. We have key health and safety leaders alongside senior directors in global organizations to discuss what action is needed over the coming 12 months to make health and safety a bigger priority across all industries. I'm going to introduce the panel, and I'd like them to come up as I do so. First of all, please welcome Andrew McNaughton, who's Deputy Chief Executive, Chief Operating Officer of Balfour Beatty. Judith Hackett, who's Chair of the Health and Safety Executive. Dr. Todd Wright, welcome. Dr. Todd Wright, who's Managing Director of Sellafield Limited. Dr. Richard J.L. Heron, Vice President Health and Chief Medical Officer BP and President of the Society of Occupational Medicine, and Dr. Karl Ulrich Köhler, who's CEO and Managing Director of Tata Steel Europe. Welcome to you all. Very good to see you. So, I mean, this is all fairly informal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to speak for a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, say something about the impact of the topic on their organization. Then we'll have a conversation between us, and we'll also, I hope, have time to take a few questions. So let's begin with Andrew.
Thank you. Good morning. Clearly, many of you in the room will be aware of some of the aspects of which my organization is involved in. One of the most fascinating things about the issue and the topic that we're talking about today impacts us as we become a more global organization. Over the last 10 years, we've moved from what was simply the UK's leading construction company to now operating in more than 80 countries. For me, a landmark moment was when we acquired an organization called Parsons Brinckerhoff. And we went from being an organization that operated overnight, from an organization that operated in 12 countries to an organization that operated in 80 countries. And many of those with some interesting challenges, not least of which was an operating unit rehabilitating Iraq at the time. It gave us some fascinating challenges then, and it still gives us the challenges now as we face what has to be done over the next 12 months. If I'm honest about it, I don't think the challenges over the next 12 months have changed, because I still think there are many, many things that we have to tackle, and many things that we have to tackle in different places around the world as cultures are different around the world. Our business is certainly changing, and I'd be interested to share in the discussion as to some of those things that we're looking at over the next few months.
Judith?
For my part, and people know that I am ex-business, so I worked in industry for many years before I went to the Health and Safety Executive. So in some respects, I see this from both sides. For me, the priority is not to make health and safety a priority as such, because I hear so many companies tell me that health and safety is their number one priority. And I'm really never sure quite what that means, because I think actually you're all in business to be successful at business. For me, health and safety needs to become a core value in every business. It needs to be part of how you do business, but whether or not it needs to be a bigger priority as a subject in its own right, I would really question. For me, what that means is that it needs to be a subject where people become much more focused on what are the particular issues for them in their business. And it will be different for different businesses. If we look at the huge range of businesses that we have just here in the UK, the nature of risk in one business will be very much focused on health issues. Somewhere else it will be very much more about catastrophes, major explosions, for example. And it's really important, I think, for businesses to look hard at themselves and understand what the real priorities in their own business are, rather than in the generality of health and safety. What are we doing to help that, which I think is the other part of this question? What do we see as being important? It is, I think, to recognize how the world of business is changing. We do now provide a regulatory framework that covers everyone, from big multinationals through to very small businesses. And so the way in which we're changing Not so much the regulation, because I would have to agree with Stephen Timms. We very much have always shared the same view as Loughstead, that our regulatory framework is fit for purpose. Many people in this room have heard me say that before. I continue to believe that's the case. All we're doing with regulation is stripping out the duplication and the overlap. But when it comes to guidance to business, we're trying to make it more accessible to all of those different types of businesses. As simple as it possibly can be for the small businesses, so that it's proportionate, leaving the detail for those businesses who really need to do it. And why are we doing that? Because we believe that's the route to greater compliance, getting to even better performance. And clearly, the proof of that will come in the delivery, but we believe that there is a logic there, that the easier you make it for people to do it, the greater the level of compliance and increased performance. So that's my view.
Dr. Wright?
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It's also a pleasure to be in the UK and offer a perspective that I bring not only as the managing director of Sellafield, but my own industrial experience in the United States. The other is following Judith. I could not agree more. I too have heard so many companies talk about safety being a priority. And for our company, it's not a priority, it is a core value. The reason that I think sometimes it gets referred to as a priority is it may be easier to communicate when someone says it's our highest priority. The problem with that, however, is that priorities change. Priorities can be influenced. Priorities get affected by other aspects of the business. And for us, it's one of 6 core values. So it's absolutely essential that safety is an underpinning, and it's an underpinning that stays with us. I think most everyone probably is familiar with Sellafield and the history of Sellafield. But Sellafield is going through a transition, and that transition is from its historical operations, nuclear operations, to decommissioning and cleanup. So I would also say that our challenge is not just for the next 12 months. Our challenge is for the next several years. The type of work is different. The challenges that the workforce is going to face is different. So therefore, the company and the approach of the company from the board all the way down to the work phase has to be reflective of that. And I think that includes 3 things, three core elements that have sort of permeated my career in the nuclear industry. It starts with leadership. Leadership is responsible for establishing the standards, being ahead of the requirements, and making sure that all the things from the boardroom all the way to the work phase are understood and clearly communicated. The next is communication. Communication between IOSH, the other institutes that we're a member of, INPO and WANO. It's absolutely essential that we maintain the benchmarking and lessons learned so that we can incorporate that, because it's a learning organization is what we want. The last is training. One of the things that, and I can't say I've been in the UK long enough to see this, is the value for training. The challenge with the aging workforce, the challenge with a different workforce that's coming up. It's a younger workforce that has the advance of technology. So being able to train and put the value for training and continue that is the way that we see is one of the key tools, along with the other 2, of preparing our company for the future and the challenges that we face, in particular as we move more into decommissioning.
Dr. Heron?
Thank you. Well, I come in with 2 hats. So my first hat is as the Chief Medical Officer for BP. This year is a continued challenge to focus on occupational, public and environmental health challenges in the company. My second hat is as President of the Society of Occupational Medicine, which actually brings me into many of the items that we've been talking about in terms of what would be the priorities for the country. My personal view is, good work is good for health, it's good for business, and it's good for national prosperity. And I do believe there is good evidence to support that, whether it's from Waddell and Burton, whether it's Michael Marmot looking at public health, or whether it's specific cases. I also believe that it isn't something that is driven by cost. There are returns on cost. cost and benefit, and there are actually low-cost solutions that can be done in small and medium-sized employers. Echoing Lawrence, I think many of our strategies are actually long-term strategies, and actually it's looking to build towards the future, particularly with some of the demographic challenges that we've heard of already. About a third of the UK workforce will be over 50 by 2020, and in 20 years' time, a quarter will be over 65. And we're going to need to have as many people who are capable of work in workplaces contributing to the national economy, and it's actually good for their health as well. So I think that means big changes in the nature of fitness for work decisions that we have to take. Also, when you look at public health challenges, sadly, we're taking our lessons from the West, and we're getting rather large around the middle. Obesity is becoming a challenge in the UK, and sadly, that has serious health and safety implications as well, which are often underestimated. Larger people often suffer from things like obstructive sleep apnea. They may find themselves drowsy during the day. They may be people who are driving tankers along roadways. Similarly, they're going to be people who've got increasing long-term health risks. And we shouldn't underestimate the costs of those, which are borne by employers, about 9 million a year at the moment, and the National Health Service, 109 billion and 120 billion on the NHS, looking at long-term health effects. So bearing in mind that most people of working age spend well over half of their working lives in workplaces, it's a critical environment in which health can be changed. There are two big changes this year that are important to note. One of them is the changes in Public Health England, which means that local authorities are taking over public health, and 150 health and wellbeing boards are looking at the health needs of populations nationally, certainly in the UK. I believe they're not thinking hard enough about the needs of workers and occupational health settings, and that's something we need to work hard at as they start their new way of working from April this year. I think the second thing is the government's response to Carol Black and David Frost's sickness absence report, which is looking again to helping people who are off work for more than 4 weeks to get back into work and stay in work. I mean, again, that's good for their own health, good for business, and good for the economy. And it's a great start. We've got a proposal to increase access, but it needs to be professionally driven by occupational health and safety professionals, and we need to shape that over the next 12 months.
Dr. Köhler?
Yeah, I'm representing Tata Steel in Europe here today. We are the second largest steel maker in Europe, and together with our colleagues in India, we are somewhere in the top 10 of the world. Just to give you an idea, we are employing in Europe some 32,000 employees and roughly 8,000 regular contractors. So it's quite a sizable business as far as that is concerned. And our target is to be a benchmark in the industry as far as health and safety is concerned. And that is a journey, which we take very serious. And how do we achieve that? I agree with what was said earlier. This must be a leadership issue. We believe and rely on the DuPont approach to this. Every incident can be avoided, is avoidable. That is a leadership task. Sometimes it sounds odd to you if you think about someone stumbling and turning and twisting his ankle, how that be a leadership task, but it is, and that's what we believe. And if I can make a comment on this question of priorities, we call safety a priority, and it is de facto already a value. Now, why is there a discrepancy eventually? And you might have touched that point. I think we need it for clear communication. So we call it a priority and we keep it as a priority. We tell people to take time out for safety. You know, I've seen enough incidents in my life, 32 years in the steel industry. I don't need an extra trigger to avoid the harm to people. You know, I've seen people crippling through incidents and worse in all that time. So it's not a question about our motives. They are clear, and the priority is also clear, because the one thing we can't replace is health and the well-being of our employees. And on the other hand, they are our strengths. and therefore we need to protect that, and we need to help them be clear about their own priorities, and therefore do it safely or not at all is not only a sentence, is an attitude that you can find. And therefore, I think there is no discrepancy in calling it a priority, except you don't mean it really. Accept that as a priority and embed it into the culture of a company, embed it into the DNA of a company, and make it a value. And this is all embedded in one of our core values, which is responsibility. And therefore, that fits also very well with this benchmark approach. We are not there, but we are on our way. Our company has managed close to 20% reduction year on year, every year. We are today, as far as my information goes, leading at least in the European steel industry, as far as the numbers are concerned. And we are not resting, because we know make it zero is an ambition which is really then, leaving that question about priorities and values eventually at the side, because that's very ultimate.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your questions coming in on text already. I'll let me go through a couple of them. One of them, I think, is directed at Judith. We operate in a medium to high risk industry and have not seen a proactive or reactive visit from HSE in 8 years. How do you think this will affect or focus the minds of business leadership teams? They want you to come along. Right?
We're very much aware of that, and we know that people continue to value visits from HSE. Some continue to fear visits from HSE, but many companies also value the advice and the experience that those sort of visits bring. People in the room will know that we have now developed sector strategies, so very much in line with what was being talked about by the Commissioner earlier this morning. We recognise that what works in one sector will be different from what works in another, so we are very much more targeting what we do, targeting our activities on those sectors that are the higher end of the risk spectrum, and indeed on the companies within those sectors who we have intelligence to tell us they are the poorer performing ones. I think that's absolutely right that we should do that. We've always taken a risk-based approach to what we do, and we will continue to do that, but with greater targeting. Those companies who still seek advice and guidance from HSE, let me assure you that it is still available. It doesn't come with a fee attached to it. The fee only comes with a material breach, not with the giving of advice and guidance. But the access to it will be through different means of interaction, either with trade bodies, with groups of employers, those sort of means, because, as we heard earlier, we have to make economies, we have to make decisions about what our priorities are, and we feel targeting on those highest risk businesses and sectors is the best use of our resource.
I'd just like to pick up something that's quite interesting in the way the question was asked, and it goes back to the way you opened your presentation about having come from business. It also picks up on the leadership point. Turn the question round. Why would businesses want to expect more proactive or reactive visits from the health and safety executive? If health and safety, as you've heard everybody up here on the platform say, is at the core of what the business is and is a fundamental driver of business success, then what the health and safety executive do, whether it be here in the UK, whether it be OSHA in the States, whether it be wherever it is around the world, are a supportive body first and foremost, and an enforcement body second. But the most fundamental principle is, if you're going to lead a business, and this is core to what you do, then you should be looking to drive those things forward on your own. The health and safety executive, or whatever the authority is there, yes, is a source of advice and guidance to actually draw on, and yet that's how it should be looked at, to assist you in what you're doing in your platform, rather than looking for visits for them to assist you.
I would slightly add to that. We believe in sharing and learning. In our industry, we have organized on different bodies. For example, in the World Steel Association, where all the steel companies in the world meet, we have made health and safety a very prominent topic, and we share and learn every incident, if possible. And that is notwithstanding that I'm in the company, certainly even informed about every recordable injury within 24 hours. and I read them, and I know what is happening. So it is not an either or. It is, I think, an inclusive approach, and I strongly, support the point that you just made. Fee for intervention can create a distance. I think it was not so clear in the prior talk where that is heading. I believe it is creating an obstacle eventually, and I think frequent exchange of experience, a fresh pair of eyes looking at things, discussing questions openly, because we are talking about, balances very often between contradicting things. Even if on the regulatory side, and how much judgment do you allow, and all these kind of questions are on the table, we can't say they're not. And so far, I think open discussion and interaction, tapping into all the expertise that, for example, staff in the HSE has, and tools they provide, is important, and also important on the other way around for them eventually to judge or have a more mature judgment about the challenges we face in the operations, that what you talk about. And that is notwithstanding what you say, we are responsible and we ultimately have to drive it forward. That's clear.
Richard? Yeah, I mean, it's one thing asking for visits from HSE, but one of the additional things I think we should call for is visits from senior leaders into the field. I mean, much more I'm interested in is making sure that our leaders are spending time in the field, understanding operations and asking questions about health and safety in the field, rather than waiting for a regulator to come in. And I think that's something we can all call for, is, and this isn't just your chief executive and your executives, these are all managers at all levels spending significant periods of their time actually in operations and understanding and listening to workers and what their health and safety issues are.
Yeah, sure. I think my comment would be that, of course, the nuclear industry relies heavily on peer review and peer checking. I mean, it's commensurate with what we do. As far as our goal, what my expectation is at Sellafield is not just to be excellent. Our goal is to influence the industry and the industry standards. And to do that, that takes a different level of performance. So I agree with the discussion with regard to leaders being in the field, asking questions, by all means. But I see our job is to make Judith's job very easy. That's basically our intent and how we see following up.
I think this next question is for Richard, since you raised the O word, obesity. Will we ever get time off during our working day to exercise?
I hope actually it doesn't come down to slices of time like that. I think actually this is also much more about the flexible way we operate our workplaces. I'm absolutely against people being screwed to their desks or to their workplaces, for periods of time, rather than actually getting the job done and being measured on the outcomes that they achieve. So quite often, actually going to do something, to do some exercise is much easier to do at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon than either before or after work. But it's not all about gyms and fitness facilities. In workplaces, we have a great deal of influence over diet and nutrition and what goes in and out of restaurants. And there are some very low-cost solutions. I recall in Strathclyde Tube, they had just put a sign at the bottom of a stairs saying, "Save time, stay healthy, use the stairs." And they found they demonstrated a significant increase in physical activity and improvements in health.
Todd, I was a member of a gym in the United States for many years, 8 years. It always amused me. The aerobics deck was on the 8th floor, and I was the only one who climbed the stairs to go there. Everybody else got on the elevator. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Well, several observations. First, I would just ask in the UK that one thing that you should not acquire from the United States, it's the term supersize. When you go to a restaurant, you don't need that. One thing I've noticed, and it's about wellness, which is part of course, about safety. That I noticed that in the UK, I am eating better, and I've done my own introspective look at that. Why is that the case? And there's just more convenience foods in the United States. There's more convenience, you know, as far as the population in terms of what they tend to do. But personally, I've seen that's been a very positive one for me. I think the other is that even in the United States, the wellness part, as was pointed out, is very important. There are parts of the United States, and I've worked in many parts, where the habits, the culture, the different regions of the United States, you know, typically their culture was to prepare food a certain way, which was not the best way. I didn't know you could deep fry a tomato until I lived in an area where we do that. So that what we found was that when we brought forward the aspect of not just workplace safety, but a robust approach to safety, which included wellness, because, you know, as an employer, you know, what I want is I want my employees to take safety home. I want them to take wellness home. And if it hadn't been for them being an employee, they wouldn't necessarily have the benefit of that. So what resonated and what we saw worked was the emphasis and importance of workplace safety, but the component about wellness and what it means not only to them, but also to their families. And that translation, so, you know, one of the takeaways and benefits, it's a multiplier. It's really a differentiator. The benefit that they have as being an employee not only comes with the benefits of being an employee, but the leverage that they get with their own families in improving the quality of life for their families. And that's always been, you know, for a company, something as a value has been very important.
Well, that strikes a chord with me because I partly grew up in Glasgow, and one of my uncles, beloved uncles, thought that the best vegetable he'd ever had was called chips. Something you may be familiar with too. Andrew, you want to
Well, the best comment there was you apparently grew up in Glasgow. Surely you either did or you didn't.
it's the growing apparent.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Just share a thought. The question was, would we ever get time off work to exercise? I mean, I think the interesting thing is how do you exercise while at work? And one of the things that we implemented a few years ago, and we were just astounded by the pace that it took off literally around the world, was a Walk the World challenge, which is where everybody forms into teams of about 6. And the challenge is over a period of time during the year for that team to effectively walk around the world. And you wear a pedometer. And this actually ties to a number of the comments that have been said already in the fact that it not only encourages people to walk to walk at work, to do a number of steps a day, but they do take it home. I mean, I thought the best one was one of the teams was from Texas about 2 years ago. And the interesting observation was from one of the guys was he wasn't getting enough steps during the day. So at the weekend, he decided to walk to the hardware store. Now, if anybody knows Texas, people don't generally walk in Texas. And he didn't realize how far away the hardware store was. But it certainly picked up his number of steps in a week. We found that now there's several thousand people are engaged in this around the world. We have teams from all over the world doing this. And it's not restricted from people who are active in their day. It's people who are in offices. And it combines together both health, a team spirit, the ability to always be first and win, but also to be able to share that knowledge and you can track how your colleagues are doing around the world. So it's not about having to take time off work, it's fitting it in and how you change your life.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions coming in. Again, thank you very much. Just want to switch things a little bit. Begin with Carl Ulrich here. How does the panel see that it can influence over the next 12 months the reduction of occupational hygiene-related ill health impacts in their organisations, given that the long latency of the illnesses and that employees have usually moved employer or retired when the illness impacts? In other words, not something which is acute, but something which might take a long time to develop. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
I think that's a very, very difficult, due to the long-termism, very difficult subject. I do believe that very much in counseling, in discussing with people about it, giving them help in, for example, how they lead their lives. That's where it starts. And in their working environment is where it ends, certainly. So it's an aspect which is very difficult to answer in a very crisp form. And I would be listening to what I hear else.
I think occupational hygiene is an absolutely critical part of ill health prevention. And in many ways, actually, doctors are at the far end. We deal with, the results of exposures. The critical bit for me is actually the hygienists need to be upstream. So this is about identifying hazards up front. So it may be even toxicologists or other people who are involved in understanding what the hazards of the workplace are. But then building in the control mechanisms at the start. So it can be really in early project design, and almost you want to have the hygienists embedded in engineering, in the engineering department, because it's actually about how you build your plant, how you prevent exposure to, say, pharmaceuticals in a manufacturing plant, or components in a chemical factory. If you get that right, then you save a tremendous amount of effort work further down the food chain for doctors and ultimately for lawyers, and all the pain and suffering for the employees and their families who may have the asbestos cases that we've tragically heard of earlier this morning.
So don't get there.
So don't get
there.
Don't. It's not about monitoring. I mean, I think that's the other thing, which is not in this room, but a widely held myth, is that industrial hygiene or occupational hygiene is about monitoring. It's absolutely not. Monitoring may give you assurance that your controls are working and they're effective, but it's actually about getting those controls in place in the first place.
Anybody else on this? Judith, do you want to?
I would just add to this that I think it is a very significant and important issue. I would absolutely agree with every speaker this morning that said we really do need to put more time and attention into the health issues, and particularly the long latency health issues. I think it needs greater leadership. I think it needs greater training and awareness among the workforce, and it needs an attitude shift in everyone, because I think too many people look at long latency and somehow have this kind of, it won't happen to me, or it's so far off, I don't need to worry about it. And by the time it happens, it's too late, and that's the tragedy of it. So it really does need more time and attention. That's the whole reason why we've arranged this conference around occupational disease, which will happen in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm hoping that we can come out of that with some concrete actions, not just for the regulator, but for everyone involved in workplace, to really make a difference to this problem and this challenge.
Yeah, just to add to the point that was made with regard to don't let it happen. It's get there early, be it on the front end. I think the other is best practices, being able to share between industries. I know as being a member of the nuclear industry does share within the nuclear industry itself. But, there are broader industrial hygiene issues that come up that even though it's nuclear, it does have applications and non-nuclear applications. So being able to get across those barriers and silos, one of the things we're doing is changing our website so that we can actually put some of these best practices on there so we can facilitate and communicate that better. I think it's a responsibility we have as a corporate citizen, but it's also beneficial because it helps us to get on the front end or the front side of it.
There's one question here, which is effectively about communication, I suppose. By promoting that every incident is avoidable, isn't there a danger of becoming risk-averse and moving further away from what is reasonably practicable and common sense? I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think on one level, I don't think I would have to challenge and say becoming risk-averse is absolutely the right place we should be. I mean, we've talked a lot, and you've heard a lot about managing risk. I mean, the key for me, if going forward in the future, is actually the elimination of risk. So if somebody said to me, do you want your business to become more risk-averse? Absolutely I do, in the way it goes about its business. I want to eliminate the risk, so therefore take people away from the risk, whether it's the risk of health issues or the risk of safety incidents. And only with a focus on saying that every one of them is avoidable, will you actually take the approach that says you have to eliminate risk, not just simply manage it.
Yeah. There's a related question just coming. Where an organisation has several priorities, can the panel offer any experience or comment on how priorities that may be contrary to good health and safety management can be handled or communicated? In other words, in businesses which can be quite difficult in these terms, you've got production. How can you handle different priorities?
Yeah. And I think that deals again with that question that we had right in the beginning. If you make your processes, and that can be de facto all processes, integrative, I think then you're on the right track. For me, a high productive process is yielding very good quality, and it will be a very safe process because of its stability. So if you think from that end, then it's not a question of either or, and very often this priority discussion leads to an either or, and I think that's the wrong approach. The right approach is to say, if my process is under control, it will yield the right results and it will be perfectly safe for the people to do that. And here I absolutely support what you just said. This is not about being risk averse, it's about eliminating risk as much as possible, and wherever you have to have judgment, make it as mature as possible. And one approach to that is, for example, keep things simple as you can. People will be having an easier time to understand what they do, and to get into the complexity of issues means very often you fail.
I think I absolutely echo what's just been said, but I think the other thing for us in health and safety positions is to look at aligning our priorities with the priorities of a business. So if you take, for example, trying to reduce process safety incidents, you have environmental reasons to stop losses of primary containment of product. You've got business reasons to keep the product in the pipe. You've got reduced hygiene exposure if you don't expose people through leaks and things. And you've got reduced need for doing additional monitoring, health surveillance, for example, if you're doing all of those things. Similarly, you want to ensure that your process operators are fit, rested, and fit for what they do. And that's going to mean that when you're sitting in front of a control room and you're looking at a well-designed, ergonomically, human factors thought about board, you're not going to have somebody making an error. And that's where you're all actually trying to align against the same set of goals, rather than, oh, well, my pet topic of the day is this in health and somebody else's is that. So it's actually trying to put yourself right in the front line, and also listening to the frontline management. And that first line manager has a major task, which we must never forget, to integrate all these priorities. That's where it all lands. And sometimes when you're sitting back either in the health and safety position or you're somewhere in the office, you really need to get right in the front and realise the impacts of what you're asking people to do. Because you may be contributing to risk rather than actually reducing it.
Yeah, just, it's, as far as priorities, the definition of priorities also relates to the outcome and how the outcome ought to be achieved. So for us, it's not about being risk averse, it's about being risk informed, being informed about the risk, and then taking the appropriate mitigating action so that it can be managed. So it really comes down to managing the priorities, as opposed to not trying to manage. It's not an either or, as was pointed out. It's about managing the outcome.
Judith, it's quite a direct question to you. Is the HSE's pragmatic and proportionate approach to health and safety at odds with the court judges who, in a recent case, stated all risk must be managed, not just that which is obvious?
No, I don't think so, and I think that's why I said earlier that I think every business has to look at itself rather than wait for the regulator to tell them what the priorities are, because the risk profile of every business will be different. And I think it's clear to me that some businesses do that risk profiling very well, and they focus on the things that really matter in their business. I think you see other businesses, and we see this, where they focus on one particular aspect of risk, perhaps the one that's easiest to manage or the most obvious, but somehow have a blind spot about some of the bigger issues that could cause bigger consequences, albeit less likely. So it's about getting that risk profile right. So I would absolutely agree with the judge. You need to think about both the obvious and the not so obvious, and focus your attention on the things that will have the biggest and worst outcomes, and fix those, and worry less about the small things.
We've just got a few minutes left, and I think this might be useful for all of you to summing up, because someone in the audience has asked, we talk a lot about leadership and financial arguments. What about the profession? How does our approach need to change? So do you have a message for the people in this room about that and how they should or should not function? Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we take take it as a profession, it's interesting to say the profession, because if you look at the breadth of organisations represented here today, we've got a number of professions. But if you the professional way we've got to approach it is two things. First of all, professional through management and leadership. In whatever you do, you either have a personal responsibility or a corporate responsibility to deal with these things. If you look at it in a professional sense from where I come from, everything starts from design. It's been mentioned here this morning already, in that from a professional point of view, we have to look at how we design, whether it be processes, facilities, or techniques, or even products that we're going to be using. And then the professional way is how we deploy that into the field so that we are not making those that work for us having to make judgments as to how they apply it. That's our professional responsibility to ensure that we don't leave that for them to do.
I do believe health and safety is a topic that can't be delegated. And that's for me the most important piece. Can't be delegated. That means health and safety departments should think of what their position is, and it is a position on timeline. If you go in the Bradley curve from a maturity level to another, you want to be, whatever, independent and later interdependent even, then you need to integrate that into the behavior of each and every leader, each and every employee. Other than that, you can't come, for example, to zero harm. How would you? And therefore, health and safety employees who are working in such departments are, for me, very important for the understanding, for being up to date on the tools, having the informations, also provide a fresh pair of eyes, go out and check kind of approach. But after all, leaders have to be the best health and safety agents in the company if we take that serious.
I think one of the biggest things we can do is to really focus on building capability in the front line. One of the biggest tragedies is actually to find organisations that really don't know what they don't know, whether it's health or safety. 70% of employees don't have access to any occupational health services, which is something which really needs to be fixed. So I think that's the first thing that we can do. The second thing which I think we're getting better at is lobbying government for change and doing it in a joined up way. It's great that we have got so many different professions and professionals in the room, actually all talking the same language and talking about the same priorities. We're now in health involved in something called the Council for Work and Health, which has IOSH on it, it has Society of Occupational Medicine on it, it has physiotherapists, it has occupational therapists, rehabilitation, and actually getting a common position that we can then talk to departments of health, departments of work and pensions, departments of employment, biz, is actually causing the government to realise that we actually do know what we're talking about and we're providing a consistent message, and I think that's making a big difference.
I rely quite heavily on my safety professionals, and I guess what I would say is this: where you can, look at the gaps. Look at the gaps in performance that exist between line management. Line management's responsible, and with the safety professionals where you are at, and see what you can do to identify what those gaps are, and work collaboratively with line management to assist. It's most important for employee engagement. That's one of the pillars, I guess, of communication in all of this. So, go away here from this meeting just a little bit different in terms of what initiative, what steps can you take to look at where you're at now and what improvements can you identify with the result of raising the standards of performance.
I think the role of health and safety professionals is as important as it's ever been. And you have multiple functions to perform in the business. You are the conscience of the business, you're the identifiers of the gaps, you're the identifiers of the solutions, you are facilitators, leaders, influencers, all of those things. But I absolutely echo the comment that was made earlier. Never, never allow your bosses to delegate safety to you and make you do it for them. You have to push it back up to them because they have to lead the way.
Thank you very much. Our thanks to the panel. Thank you for a very interesting discussion.